In the middle of this crisis, it's easy to forget that Syria has always been a crossroads of civilization and of faith. It's an ancient land. Here it's been the start and the end of the Silk Road from China. And here we are at the western edge of the Silk Road, at the ancient city of Tartus, which was settled by the Phoenicians in the 3rd century BC, heading out to the island of Arwad, also settled by the Phoenicians in the 3rd century BC, which was a center for the trade routes in the Mediterranean and a major port in the eastern Mediterranean. Arwad is mentioned even in the Bible, in the books of Genesis and Ezekiel. It was Canaanite peoples here before the Phoenicians came. It was associated with the ports of Tyre and Sidon further south. The Egyptians conquered this area under Thutmose and Ramses in the second millennia BC. Alexander the Great came here as well and conquered. So many empires have conquered this area. It's been a major center for trade from Europe to Arabia and across, of course, China. Throughout millennia, Syria has been at the crossroads and, of course, has suffered as a result and have benefited as a result as well. During the Christian era, Tartus, which is the port we've come out of, and Arwad, was a center for the early church. Some of the bishops from Tartus are mentioned in the early church councils which established the creed of the Christian church. They were present at those early councils. After the Muslim conquest, the Muslims settled here and the Christians remained in the Byzantine era. And then, of course, the Crusades came here. It was a crusading capital. The Crusaders occupied Arwad, and Tartus, across the water here, became the center and the headquarters for the Knights Templar in their campaigns in the Holy Land. We mustn't forget, of course, that there's a very mixed history, a Christian history here as well. That the Christians in the Crusades, they came and there was quite a brutal massacres of Christians, Muslims and Jews because they were very ignorant of the fact of Christianity and Jews already present in the land, and of course indigenous peoples together, Arabs, Christians, Muslims and Jews all together. But over the few hundred years that the Crusades were here, the people mingled and they settled. But Arwad was the last island, in fact, the last stand of the Crusaders here. More recent times, in the Ottoman period, Arwad became a prison island, and Tartus remained an important center for trade and an important port in the area. During the conflict, although Tartus is more peaceful than other parts of Syria, it's predominantly an Alawite city, and many people have suffered losses from this city, and many refugees have come to stay in this city. So there isn't one corner of Syria that hasn't suffered the consequences of this terrible conflict. And yet amidst it all, people are carrying on with life. We will arrive in Arwad and we will see daily life in Arwad and how it's living, how the faith communities are still there. And we will also explore a little bit of Tartus as well when we get there. But amidst it all, life goes on, and we have a boat full of passengers here, just people going back to their homes or visiting the island, getting on with daily life amidst the current situation in this land, which is so full of incredible history and culture and faith. So this remarkable island of Arwad was settled by the Phoenicians in the 3rd millennia BC. We're talking 5,000 years of history. Before that, it was a Canaanite settlement, as was Tartus. And it protected the city of Tartus and the city of Amrit, which we shall visit a little bit later. But the Phoenicians were here in the 3rd millennium BC, and their Phoenician sea defenses there are still visible today. Well, here we are in a little restaurant, a little cafe in the harbour at Arwad. It's actually quite poignant sitting here. In 2010, I brought my family on holiday to Syria, and this is one of the places we came, one of the many places we came in Syria. And at that time, Syria was receiving many, many more tourists, and this cafe was in fact a restaurant. It had a full menu, plates of chicken and pizza and all sorts of things on offer and drinks, and actually the cafe was crowded with tourists, lots of foreign tourists, and it was difficult to find a seat. Now it's actually really run down, and all that they can offer is tea or coffee, and of course there are no visitors. It's just locals who are here. So it's a little bit poignant, but happy memories of here, and I really hope that one day, of course, the war will end, and one day tourists will come back, and there's many wonderful things to see and enjoy in this wonderful land. Most of all, the incredible people and their wonderful hospitality and generosity and resilience.
Where are you from?
Britannia.
Britannia.
Shukran. Thank you very much.
There is two school, three school. شو مادتكم أفضل مادة عندكم؟ شو بتحبوا أكثر شيء بالمدرسة؟
اجتماعيات وعلوم ورياضيات.
Mathematics, science, and history and geography.
Very good. Very good. Wonderful.
نصف
And how many children?
They are the first level in the school.
How many children in your class?
كم ولد بصفكم؟
ما بعرف.
They don't know.
Yeah, they don't. Okay. Can I take a picture? Can I take a picture?
بس بده يصوركم يا عمو هاي.
Can I?
بس تضحكوا.
انت خالته انت.
تسمع مو تسمع.
Oh, that's really nice. That's lovely. Shukran. Thank you.
شكرا يا حبيبي.
Crusader Fortress. Well, this seems a really appropriate spot to have a brief word about that highly sensitive subject, the Crusades. Highly sensitive because the Crusades have a mixed narrative within the region. Of course, on the one hand, they came across to the Middle East, mostly foot soldiers, peasants coming in their thousands on the orders of the Western Church to liberate the Holy Land from the infidels, and in the process massacring thousands upon thousands of Muslims, Christians and Jews, because they didn't realize that so many Christians existed in the region, and of course they're all indigenous, and Jews as well. And they established a foothold in the region, of course, conquering the region for a couple of hundred years over the period of the Crusades. So that psyche there in the region, this is remembered by the Middle East, that period, with great sensitivity. But of course, there's another side to that as well. For the period that they were here, there was engagement with the Crusaders in terms of trade, in terms of engaging with the local people. And so they were well established for a couple of hundred years. Here we have the Crusader Fortress on the island of Arwad, 13th century. Interestingly, this was the place of the last stand of the Crusaders, the very last stand. They had their headquarters, the Knights Templar had their headquarters in Tartus across the water. They had been kicked out by Saladin in 1188, I think. But here they were, and in 1302 they were finally kicked out by the Mamluks. So this is the last stand of the Crusaders in the Holy Land here on the island of Arwad. And the Mamluks extended this fort, and so did the Ottomans when they came here as well. And it was used as a prison as well in later years. But we're again here in a major piece of military and religious history. At the Phoenician sea defences on the island of Arwad, these walls that you see behind me are 3rd millennium BC. That's nearly 5,000 years old, nearly 3,000 years before Christ. I forgot to mention earlier, I think, that it's very possible, very probable even indeed, that St. Paul would have stopped at this island, if not certainly at Tartus, on his journeys around the Mediterranean, as this was on the major shipping ports, on the routes crossing from Sidon to Tyre, Tartus, and across to Cyprus. We've just walked through the old town of Arwad, and an 81-year-old man came and wanted to show us the way, direct us through to the walls here, to the sea defences. He was very, very friendly. He wanted to give me a big hug and ask where you're from, and gave an extra big hug when I said I was from Britain. I said to him, what would you say to the rest of the world today? He said, we love you. He said, we love you and you are very, very welcome. He said, you and us are one. Much of our civilization comes from here. Here I am by a wall that's 5,000 years old. Our Christianity comes from Syria. It's Syrian Christians who nurtured St. Paul once he was converted in Damascus. Much of our civilization comes from Syria, the alphabet, and so much more, music. Today, we have much to learn, but we don't. Maybe history has something to tell us. Man learns nothing from our mistakes. Empires rise and pass. Wars always end. And when you see a war end and a country rebuilt or a new empire take its place, you do ask the question, what was the point? Why did so many millions suffer? Do we ever learn? Have we ever learned? And then when you walk through somewhere like this, and actually it's not just the first time, but everywhere I've been in Syria, and people come up and they give you a big hug, and again, they will say, you know, it's not your government, you're not your government, we love the British people, and we love you as people, and we're all one together, and we should all be one together. Maybe we should really listen to the Syrian people, maybe we should really listen to history. Maybe we should value what we have and what history teaches us. What's really remarkable is that actually in ancient monuments in Assyria and in Egypt, Arwad's ships are mentioned from 3000 BC. So in fact, for 5,000 years this island has been known as a shipbuilding island. In fact, in ancient times it had a very powerful navy when it was a kingdom that covered down to Tyre in what's now South Lebanon. And still today, even in the current situation, these ships are still being made. They're being made by traditional methods, all in wood, and apparently they're still being made to order and exported. They're very highly skilled made, crafted, and ideal for the Mediterranean.